Hello, Thailand, and welcome to Think Thailand 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, I am proud to say that as I stand here in front of you, enterprise blockchain is here. And when I say that, I mean it's literally here in Thailand. And it's changing everyday life for business and everyday life for people like you and I. So this is pretty cool, and I want to share our journey with you and some of our stories, if that's okay. Hey, Silawat, how are you? So our journey started over here. It started maybe when I was a little kid, and IBM ventured into transaction systems. So in IBM, we are very proud that many of the world's transactions flow through our systems. So we're always on the lookout and to help innovate new ways of driving transaction processing. And then a new way came. It was called Bitcoin. Bitcoin is paving the way for a new type of digital cryptocurrency. And while IBM, we're kind of neutral on Bitcoin itself, with our eyes of transaction processing, we started to see a new way to process transactions. And then, on our journey, we started to think, if there's 1,000 applications for this new technology under Bitcoin called blockchain, maybe Bitcoin is just one. There's another 999 applications. What about these other applications? And then Ethereum introduced the notion of smart contracts. And then we started saying, wow, now we can actually program blockchain to support applications across all industries. But we were missing something. Our journey continued with the invention of a new style of blockchain that was built from the ground up to bring trust to multiple institutions. And we call that Hyperledger Fabric. And I'll be talking about that more. And that journey brings us to where we are today. I'm on stage in Thailand talking to you about IBM blockchain. Today, we have 1,100 networks running on the IBM blockchain platform. Several of those networks are pioneered here in Thailand. 10% of those are active live networks, you might call them production. And many of them are poised to change everyday life. So let me share my excitement with you with 3 stories. So let me start by asking, has this ever happened to you? Have you ever been on your way to the airport, maybe you rushed there and you're hungry. You pick up a sandwich at the airport and now you're on the airplane and maybe you're not feeling so well. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you have ever gotten sick by eating bad food? It happens to us all. In fact, in 2006, I remember this in the US, a nationwide outbreak of E. coli was linked to bagged spinach. But it took regulators 2 weeks to conduct the traceback and determine the exact source. And during that time, spinach, many thousands of pounds of spinach was just discarded because we didn't know where the source was. I'm pleased to say that everyday life is now changing for the better. The Food Trust Network is happening today, co-created by IBM and many world brands that are working together on this system which quickly pinpoints the sources of contaminated food. This then has a dramatic speed up on the identification of where that food is so that recalls can happen and limit the number of people who die or get sick from contaminated food. So how does this work? Right now, in a supply chain, like a complex food supply chain, there are many, many institutions from farm to fork. And there's many siloed views of data. So blockchain gives a global view where the food could now be tracked and traced. In fact, we have one vendor that has a mobile application where you can point it at the food label, and on your phone you can see the journey of the food from the farm to the package. And that's pretty impressive. In fact, Walmart did an experiment. They went into a store and they picked up a bag of sliced mangoes from the store, and they did a study to trace how long it would take in the siloed world before blockchain to determine where those sliced mangoes came from. It took 7 days. With the food trust networks, ladies and gentlemen, 2.2 seconds using the IBM blockchain platform. Frank Yanis, who is the food safety officer for Walmart, said that's food traceability at the speed of thought. And I think you'll agree that my first example is an example of blockchain changing business, changing supply chain, but changing everyday life for the better. Okay, a couple more stories, quickly. Have you ever filled out an application to rent a condominium, an apartment, or a house? We all have. And then even in 2019, there's still many places that are quite paper-based. So you get introduced, fill out all of these forms. And the apartment or the condo rental agency asks you questions about the status of your bank account. What's your telephone number? What's your address? Where do you live? And now, I don't know if you're like me, but my digital life is a mess. I have information spread all over the internet in accounts here, there, and everywhere. So you work on this process, you rent your apartment, a month later, you get an email like this. How many of you have gotten an email saying, oops, we're sorry, your data has been breached? Ladies and gentlemen, this is the scourge of digital society. But, and an estimated, this is happening all the time, 15.4 million customers were hit by some type of identity theft in 2016. I can only imagine what it is today. But, ladies and gentlemen, to continue my story here, everyday life is changing for the better. The days of big data breaches are numbered. In Canada, the Verified Me network is changing the way identity is managed. Kind of participated in by the 7 major Canadian banks to act as stewards to help people take control back of their identity. The way this works is you keep your identity in one place, and your identity is yours. It doesn't belong to the apartment rental agency. It doesn't belong to the Department of Motor Vehicle or the bank. You treat your data like it's a piece of digital music or art that you've created. It's something you've created, so now you license it to these institutions. With blockchain, you keep your data on your machine, but you use the blockchain as a permissioning system to allow and give permission to the rental agency to ask questions to the Department of Motor Vehicle about where you live, the cell phone provider, about what your cell phone number is. And it's only with that permission could they get that information from them. So you're in control. With your thumbprint, you can give access. And with blockchain, there's no tracing, and this is very important to prevent identity theft. There's something called triple-blind data exchange, and we can support that in blockchain. And it simply means that the apartment rental agency does not know, they know the information is coming from the bank, but they don't know which bank you bank at. Similarly, the bank doesn't know where you're renting your apartment. That's double blind. And then triple blind is the network provider, SecureKey and IBM, don't know either. This is very powerful. And last, you only need to share the information that is pertinent to get your application. They don't need to know how many bank accounts you have, etc. So I think you will agree that we are taking a giant step with blockchain to take control of your identity, and that's a second example of changing everyday life with blockchain. And the last question is, has this ever happened to you? This has happened to me. This is about counterfeiting. And blockchain is taking a run at eliminating counterfeiting from the supply chain. And in this example, that's a picture of my younger son, my only son, who, when he was younger, was doing Taekwondo. And I was the chaperone of a Taekwondo tournament. And after the tournament, many of the kids had aches and pains. So they said, Mr. Cuomo, do you have any aspirin for us? So I went into my bag and I had some aspirin and I gave it to the children. One of the parents looked at the aspirin and said, Jerry, what are you giving my child here? And I looked at it and I said, I think that's an aspirin. And they said, you think that's an aspirin? What is it? And I Googled a number on the aspirin, and it was a generic version of an aspirin. It was a generic version of Tylenol. Whew, I was very nervous. But this is not just a problem I have. Counterfeiting could happen all the time. In fact, 1 in 10 medical products circulating in low and middle income countries are either substandard or falsified, says the World Health Organization. We are doing work to digitize the physical world so that we can put a fingerprint of items like aspirin or, let's say, olive oil, and digitize those items authentically and place them on the blockchain. So in this example, we're using an invention called the IBM Crypto Anchor. It's a mobile application with AI intelligence built in and a special lens. When you point it at a physical device, maybe the manufacturer of the aspirin at the factory takes a digital fingerprint of this aspirin. We create a light spectral analysis of the aspirin, and that becomes the fingerprint. Maybe later at the pharmacy, the pharmacist could check the aspirin and see it has a different fingerprint, which means it's a different aspirin, and it might be counterfeit. That's just a picture. This is actually a live video of this process being worked. That's the first aspirin. There's the light spectral analysis showing the authenticity of the first aspirin. That happens to be the correct one. This is a fake one. It has a different spectrum. You can see the different peaks. 2 peaks, 1 peak on the bottom. Bottom one's fake. The top one is real. This is preventing counterfeiting by digitizing physical goods in a supply chain onto a blockchain so that we can track and trace the provenance, the origin of a physical good. And I think, ladies and gentlemen, eliminating counterfeiting from supply chain, I think you'll agree, is a great example of blockchain changing everyday life. Now, what do all of these have in common? They all build trust. We talked about trust earlier through a blockchain that has been built from the ground up exclusively for enterprises and business. And this is not a hypothetical thought. This is a real thought. And that blockchain, as I said earlier, is called Hyperledger Fabric. And it has 4 critical features in it that differentiate it from the blockchain under Bitcoin or Ethereum. The first is accountability. So an enterprise blockchain is not anonymous, because businesses need to be known to pass regulations like GDPR. You may have heard the term permission blockchain. It comes from this accountability feature that we've added into Hyperledger Fabric. It's a permissioned blockchain. Now, while you're known to the network, it's important that businesses could interoperate and work privately in confidentiality. So we've added confidentiality to blockchain for enterprise blockchain. These use cases that I shared with you must perform and scale, supporting thousands of transactions per second. So we've been really focused on performance and scale. And last but not least, an enterprise blockchain must be secure. It must be fault tolerant. It must continue to work even in the presence of bad actors or careless actors. And we bring this to you, and our first customers in Thailand started about 2 or 3 years ago using the IBM blockchain platform to implement their solutions based on Hyperledger Fabric with advanced tooling for developers and operators to operate, govern, and grow networks. Our blockchain solution is fully containerized and runs anywhere. IBM Cloud, your private cloud, other public clouds, or combinations therein through the magic of Kubernetes and Red Hat OpenShift. Our blockchain platform is one of 3 areas that makes up the IBM blockchain mission.